the idea of the third sculpture began in relationship to two other ideas. So the beginning point was probably Joseph Beuys and his idea of social sculpture, and the idea of there being a relationship between the individual and society, which is a reciprocal relationship, whereby the individual is shaping society and society is shaping the individual. And Beuys understood this as a plastic relationship, in the sense of it being a kind of a sculptural relationship. And then Beuys also speaks about the cognitive process as being a sculptural process, the reception of information and shaping that information into an idea or concept as being a sculptural process, which was also for me very connected to my reading and working when I was at college on William James's idea of pragmatism. It's actually very connected to this idea. But so if the social sculpture is the connection between the individual and the group, in a sense it's the we, the idea of the cognitive process as a sculptural process was what I termed the thinking sculpture, and this would be sort of like the first person singular. This would be the I, the self. But then in between the society and the individual, or in between individuals, or between two ideas, or between a dominant culture and a subculture, there was also a space. And this space I decided to call the third sculpture. And it came a great deal out of my projects out on the street and trying to understand where the work was located and the way in which no singular object was important, no singular photograph, video, letter, document, but in a sense that there was an activity that was going from points to points, and third sculpture was a way to refer to that activity. So what happened was the first major piece I did on the street was I Am For You, Ich bin für Sie, because it happened in New York and Cologne. And in this piece, with a few participants, we stopped and spoke to 11,750 people over a 4-year period. And so there were all of these photographs and letters and documentation and notes and drawings and actually sculptural objects and things that were coming out of that project that were both being generated from the interaction, but were also being generated as I was trying to understand what had happened. And I decided to create the archive for the project as a kind of map of the project. That would be a way to have all of the information about one project in one place, so that there'd be the chance to share that with others if they were interested, and to make transparent the actual project itself. And that's how the archives began to emerge, was how do I create something that is sympathetic to the nature of the project itself as an object. My interest in alternative economies, and to be clear, at that time I was interested in it in different notions of exchange that existed outside of the typical notion of exchange within the gallery system. Because I've been living only in New York and as an artist in New York at this point. And you have to understand, unlike France, a huge amount of cultural production is driven by the galleries. We don't have many small art centers and so on. So that influence of needing an object that you can sell and resell and define and have be static in one particular way is what the gallery system is based upon. Its support system is based upon that. Everything is based upon that idea of having an object which you can measure, you can weigh, you can sell to somebody who then can sell it to somebody else, and that object remains the same. But if you start doing project work, where you have pieces of paper, you've got photographs, you've got correspondence that occurs after the project, you've got future reenactments of the project, you've got all these things happening. It doesn't really fit into the paradigm of your typical commercial gallery. It just doesn't. So after struggling with that relationship for a while, I realized that it didn't make sense to try to make that work for me. And so I was looking at alternative systems. I did some research on the idea of creation of an agency to support project work, but also I was interested in how there were different works which were consciously working with a different economy and a different notion of exchange, alternative to with the gallery. And I was interested in both those when they were done in symbolic ways, but also in a long-term, permanent way. And how, if you change the notion of exchange and the value structure behind a work, you utterly change what's possible in the work itself. And it means a huge amount to create a new value structure based upon a new type of exchange within your work if you're doing a work which doesn't fit within the gallery system really well. So instead of having to apologize all the time for what you're expecting the gallery system to do, you're able to actually make a work which is compatible with the system of exchange that you've set up as its premise. More specifically, I was also interested in, the reason it's called the materialization of life into alternative economies is that it was looking at Lucy the Poet's book, 6 years in the dematerialization of the object of art, and trying to say that some of those artists perhaps were not interested in so much the dematerialization of an object as much as they were in the materialization of life. That in some ways, some of those pieces were more about life than they were about a conscious alteration of an art form. And how do we represent life, or how do we materialize life? And it was important for me to sort of redirect that, because just by simply redirecting your attention to the outside, so to speak, meaning not just what was the form of the art object, but the broader subject of life, then you can see different things in the work, and different hierarchies or different value structures or different notions of what succeeds and doesn't succeed begin to occur. And I wanted to say, here's a sort of a very introduction to it, to this idea that maybe there's a different typology out there. The book business as an art project started in '98, and so it was 2 years later, something like that. So it was around the same time that I was thinking about this subject. I was interested, because from doing the projects out on the street, one of the things that struck me was, if you begin to look at art as being about the creation of meaning, and an awareness of the creation of meaning, and then you start thinking about issues around meaningfulness, one of the things that I found on the conversations with people out on the street is that one of the most meaningful things to most people is the simple issue of being able to survive, how one survives. And it's a subject matter which is connecting a lot of people. Well, maybe not connecting, but common to a lot of people. And of course, when you're an artist starting out, it's a profoundly difficult thing also. You're trying to figure out how to continue to make your work and still be able to survive. And I had grown up in the art world and knew a lot of artists who had ceased making art. And so the issue of how one can develop a practice which is both challenging, but at the same time can have some longevity. It isn't just like, I've got a great idea that'll last me until I run out of my savings from my summer job or money that my parents are willing to give me when you're a young student or something. But really, how does one develop a practice that won't just last for 10 years and then you get pissed off at the art world and you say, fuck it, and you leave and do something else? But instead, how can you come up with a practice which will allow you to do it until you're 80 or 90 if you want to? To think about it in a longer term kind of thing, to make decisions to allow you to make challenging work for the long term is a difficult thing. And so that idea connected with the notion of survival, that we all share, the need to survive, then kind of emerged and also my departure from my galleries around 1995, because project work was not fitting with the gallery system, emerged my interest in alternative economies, alternate modes of support for what your practice is. And then finally, the idea of the book-selling business, sometimes known as sculpture, is to be able to provide a living for your family. And finally, that idea emerged as an artwork. So in The Digger Dug, what happens in that project is at that time I was interested in how in project art a lot of the works that were occurring were, whether people were conscious or not, a lot of the works that were occurring were actually pieces where people were trying to help other people, whether it was through activism, whether it was through kind of social work projects, whether it was through interacting with people on the street. There was some idea behind it which was about their relationship to others who weren't from the art world and the possibility of trying to improve a situation or make new information known. And this whole idea of the possibility of helping others and impossibility of helping others through an art practice was something that interested me. So the next stage in the development of the discussion of project art, I felt had to be a discussion of what does it, not, okay, we are in the public space now and no longer in the art institution, and isn't that wonderful that we're doing stuff elsewhere, but more, well, what does it actually mean now that we're doing it in this space, and what effect does it have, and what are the implications of our being there on that, and dealing with people outside of the system, outside of the gallery system. Issues around representation of participants, issues around duration, like, okay, if you want to do a project, for example, where you're trying to help a community out on the street, if you're only there for a week for the length of your show, or long enough to get your photographs together or your video, what does that mean compared to if you're doing a project which is going to last for 10 years to try to help out a community? And what happens to the role of authorship? All of these basic questions. Where is the artwork actually located? And is there a possibility that at a certain point you actually have to leave the art discourse in order to achieve the project that you want to achieve in that public space? So the notion of disappearance from the gaze of the art world through the project into the public space is also a real issue. And how does one handle that as an artist?